Welcome to the Stanford Neurodiversity Summit. Some of you have already participated all along in the summit. For those of you who just joined, welcome to the summit. We would like to let you know that all sessions are recorded and transcribed. Please check our summit website for YouTube videos. Also, you should have received. Welcome to the Stanford Neurodiversity Summit. You should have received feedback form in your email that you received in the morning of each day. So please go back to your email and click the feedback form, and we will be able to know what you think about all the different aspects of the summit. Today, all questions from the audience will be submitted through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. The moderators will try to cover as many questions as possible. Now I'm going to pass the mic to Dr. Marcy Schwartz.
Hi, nice to be here with you today. My name is Marcy Schwartz, and I'm one of the moderators for this panel. I have a private practice in Los Gatos where I work with neurodiverse and unique learners, helping them make the transition from high school to college. And I'm also an adjunct clinical associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences here at Stanford University School of Medicine. My co-moderator today is Yael Valek, who is the co-founder of REAL, which stands for Resilience and Engagement for Every Learner. Her organization works to support neurodivergent, twice exceptional learners by building bridges between their parents and teachers. We are glad to be with you all here today. Before we get started, I wanted to introduce Helen Zhu, who would like to say a few words about the initiative that will soon launch for the K-12 special interest group. There's Helen, thanks.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Marcy. So as part of our outreach to spread the neurodiversity movement to K-12 schools and students, the Stanford Neurodiversity Project is initiating the Network for K-12 Neurodiversity Education and Advocacy, or in short, NEA. This network seeks to foster a community for K-12 students, parents, and educators interested in neurodiversity to share and discover unique advocacy efforts, stories, and experiences. So monthly NEA meetings will feature students, parents, and/or educators from diverse backgrounds who want to speak about and discuss their experiences with neurodiversity and/or advocacy efforts and contribute to a larger network of neurodiversity education and advocacy across the globe. So if you're interested in being added to our mailing list to receive information about our monthly meetings, please fill out our interest form, which I will send in the Q&A function shortly. I will also attach a link to our website if you wanted to read more about it. So our first meeting will be on Thursday, November 19th from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time with Sienna Castellan as our first guest speaker. If you sign up through the form, you will receive more details with the Zoom link closer to the date. If you have any questions, please email neurodiversity-nia@stanford.edu. I will include this email address in the Q&A as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Helen. That's great. It's an exciting project. And now I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'd like you to meet Jay Dunlap, who is the head of school and director of curriculum and instruction at Renaissance Learner Academy. He has dedicated over 25 years to educating neurologically and culturally diverse students. His experience is rooted in a wide range of educational settings, including private, public, rural, and urban schools. Over the last 15 years as principal and head of school, he has mentored several teachers and administrators while continuing to teach students in the classroom. So welcome, Jay. I'm glad you're here today. Dr. Louise Kindle is our other panelist, and she is a California and Oregon State licensed doctor of psychology. Dr. Kindle specializes in working with neurodiverse individuals and their families operating from a collaborative, strength-based, integrative perspective. Dr. Kindle also helps build helped build Camp Altitude, an overnight camp for kids and teens on the autism spectrum. So welcome, Dr. Kindle. I'm glad to have you both here as panelists, and we'll turn it over to you both.
Great. Thank you, Marcy, for that introduction. Hi, Jay. Hi, everybody.
Hi. Nice to see you.
So to get rolling here, Jay, it might be helpful to give everyone a little bit of a backdrop into our prior discussion and how we wanted to format today.
Yeah, when we were talking about doing this panel, one of the things that we really felt resonated with us is hearing how professionals who work together actually do the work, and telling stories, and making it very real. And so we decided that we would like to approach this from the direction of a conversation between two professionals, and encourage you to kind of listen and then share your questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know one of the feedback pieces that I've gotten through the years from parents is that it's always helpful to hear professionals sort of talk amongst themselves. And likewise, in my work, it's very important and helpful to kind of hear a team talk together about how to approach a student's learning. So in our discussion, Jay, we came up with some guiding questions for our talk, and then some key points as well. So where would you like to jump in?
Well, I think we should start with our key points. What it comes down to in so many cases is, you know, we spend a lot of time worrying about the past, and then sort of fearing the future. And when we look at, like, how do you prepare long-term for life skills, it really comes down to how do you tell the story of who you are, and how do we as professionals, when we're working with students, foster communication among parents and the students' own sort of gestalt, and other professionals, and how do we tell that story in a way that's generative and supportive and realistic, and at the same time really focused on strengths. So, you know, as we were talking, we kind of came down to how we frame our stories, and how important it is to frame our stories in ways that are accurate, and also strengths-based. And then how do we kind of create the conditions for success, and what are those conditions for success for a team working with a student, and how do students learn how to advocate for themselves and navigate some of the operational details of, say, executive function, and becoming more and more independent.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, I know when we first started talking, you know, we had talked about going through a starting point, and often for students, a starting point is around an evaluation. And you know, I'm in my profession, I'm usually the one that does the initial assessment or evaluation. And in our original discussion, Jay, we talked about how that's very much not often a strength-based view of someone, how it's often very pathology-based. And while it has its place, because we need to distinguish what a person's strengths and challenges are, it often isn't so helpful in creating the frame for a more positive narrative for a student. So one of the things through the years that I've really tried to do is focus more on strengths. What is working well for the student? What are their interests? How do we pair their interests with the school environment? And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you do that at your school.
Sure. We recognize that students are going to come in with some kind of exceptional qualities in every direction, and they're in every student, there's a place where they lose time. There's this sort of magic thing. It might be Minecraft, or it might be tanks, or it might be artistic expression or something that they research. And in that moment where they lose time, they're fully engaged. And so we try to take those moments, you know, in kind of education speak, it's sort of like a teachable moment, but these are things that the students really teach themselves. And moving from there, how do we construct an experience that keeps bringing them back to a moment where they can have at least one thing that they feel successful and is meaningful every single day? And for so many students, school is a nightmare. It's exhausting. They have huge anxiety. They, by the time they're in high school, often they've had more experience with what they can't do than what they can do. And there's a sort of mindset that builds up that becomes a barrier to breaking through. And one of the things that's critical is finding something every day where they can shine genuinely. And that's going to vary from student to student, but that's the first thing we do is we take a look at where do you lose time, and then how do we give you that experience every single day, at least once.
I like how you frame that, you know, how you lose time, because it's often when we're losing time that we're engaged in things that we're enjoying and that we're good at. And I was thinking too, how often we see students who are in sort of an avoidance pattern, and to the professionals at school, to the teachers, to the counselors, that oftentimes can look like a won't. Versus, you know, maybe I can't switch sets, maybe I can't, you know, switch my interests. And I was thinking too in our discussions how important it is to have people at the school that can recognize what is sort of a can't versus a won't. And can you speak a little bit to that and how your staff manages that piece of things?
Yeah, I think it's really about perception. And so if you go back, like in McClaskey's work on executive function, one of the sort of salient points is how we perceive our environment and how we perceive ourselves has so much to do with our ability to activate and to be able to make the decision that you can. So when somebody won't do something, it's probably because they have a misperception about what's expected or about their ability to do so, or they've been taught, so to speak, that it's not in their wheelhouse. And so the first thing is to kind of align perceptions. And I know this seems kind of like backward, but actually, if you can get people to perceive the expectations and their own abilities, then you can cut the line between won't and can't. And when you get to a place where somebody's like recognizing that they're anxious about something or that they have stress about it, then usually there's a willingness there. When you come up against the wall, and that's when you're more likely to hit the can't. And there aren't very many can'ts, honestly. I would say, you know, it's more than anything about getting people to perceive their environment and themselves in a more accurate way. So, for example, I've heard a lot of times from students, well, I can't write because I'm dyslexic. And actually, that's not true at all. The two things have nothing directly related to each other in terms of ability. You have to write differently. You have to think differently. You have to approach writing from a different perspective. But you don't. If you approach it from, I get a pass on writing because I have this learning challenge, then you'll never get good at it. And the truth is that we have to practice the things that are hardest for us the most rigorously. And so you have to adjust for quality over quantity. You may need to adjust for how much time it takes to do something, but you can't adjust the bar downward. In fact, especially if we're up against something that's a very specific LD, you have to adjust the bar to, you have math anxiety, you need to practice math every day. And practicing math, even a little bit of math every single day, will help you move through that anxiety and then eventually get to the can. But cans are almost always just complicated feelings.
Well, I'm having two thoughts. One is meeting a student sort of where they are at that particular moment, and helping kind of teach up and scaffold up. And the other thought that I'm having as you're talking is just around the self-advocacy piece. How do we help students advocate for themselves? How do we help them find the language? Because oftentimes I find that students actually know really well where their strengths and challenges are. It's a matter of communicating it effectively. So from where I sit in my job, oftentimes I'm trying to educate the support people to encourage that self-advocacy, to create a safe space for the student to say, you know, this is what I prefer to be doing. This is what I'm really good at. This is where I might need some help. And, you know, the languaging that we give our students for self-advocacy, I think is a really important piece. So maybe that's something for us to tease apart.
Yeah.
In the beginning years of school, how do we help a student create languaging around self-advocacy, whether it be verbal language or even nonverbal language? And then maybe we can talk a little bit how that looks through the school years, up through high school, and even perhaps even to college. What are your thoughts on that for the younger kiddos?
Well, I think, you know, it's a progressive development and it's pretty incremental toward independence. And so the younger a student is, the more the onus is on the parents and the support network having common language and having sort of a clear point of departure and say, okay, here's our current status, here's our next step, or zone of proximal development. And as the student grows, the student owns more and more of those benchmarks and becomes more and more intimately in charge of what does my next step look like, and that sort of inquiry. In your practices, like, we know each other because we work together with students, and sort of the clinical setting and the school setting are dramatically different settings. And how we work with parents in particular, I think is key, especially if our goal is to be supporting together the entire family's development through the student's education. And that's where, you know, I've had a lot of good times working with you, actually, is in that sort of, where does family life and sort of the whole picture fit into the educational piece, and not just looking at well, this is about a reading challenge, or this is about a mathematics challenge, or this is about social anxiety or something along those lines. But it's actually about, how do we create a whole picture of the human being and their kind of the story as they evolve.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the complexity, just trying to capture the complexity and trying to take a holistic view in this 40 minutes that we have feels, you know, as we're getting into it, sort of impossible.
Yeah.
I know for younger kiddos, what I try to do with teaching self-advocacy and encouraging self-advocacy is I'll start off by actually doing a little bit of scripting. So if a student says, no, I don't want to do that, or that's not going to happen, you know, I'll rephrase it. Oh, that, you know, this is challenging for me to do right now. I don't want to do this right now, maybe later, and kind of stretching the boundaries that way. Through language. Sometimes it has to happen in a nonverbal way when the kiddos are really young. But as the child gets a little bit older, as the students get a little bit older, figuring out ways to stretch that. You know, you said that last time. Let's think of a different way to say that after you've done some coaching. And then, you know, maybe the next step from that is, wait, try that again. I'm not sure you meant it that way. Let's practice what we practiced before. And to your point, when I'm able to do that in the therapy room, that's one thing, that's great, but oftentimes those skills don't generalize. So from my perspective, really helping the parents and the other educators involved understand what sort of languaging is being used and making sure that we're all systematically using that language is really helpful. And I appreciated very much what you said about sort of setting benchmarks. One of the things that I think does get lost, particularly in a school environment, probably because there's just so much going on and it's a dynamic setting, is when a benchmark is set, making sure that that benchmark gets met, and then adding on to in a stepwise fashion. And this is where I think coordinated communication is key. And oftentimes I have seen parents take that role and have some success in creating email chains. Sometimes I see teachers taking on that role. But from my vantage point, there needs to be someone in the team, whether it be the psychologist, the school counselor, sometimes even the students themselves, creating some sort of venue for that constant or at least periodic conversation. Make sure everyone's, again, staying on the same page and hedging forward. I am kind of curious, Jay, I don't think I've ever asked you that, but how do you set that up at your school? Because I know your families do have quite a bit of communication.
We intend by design to make things feel very natural and organic. So we have formal meetings and we set up what we call personal learning plans, or PLPs. And they always involve some academic goals, some social emotional goals, some developmental goals, and as they get older, more life skills, and getting prepared to be an adult in the world on your own. But a lot of the communication is, we communicate with the students and then we talk with the parents, and there's a lot of text messages that go on throughout the day. Like today, for example, I communicated with 3 different parents while the school day was happening, and I was interfacing with the students, and we actually have everyone on our team involved. So I almost never send an email to a parent that doesn't include the entire staff. We have kind of an open model because we're all advocating together and we're all part of a team. We all have different skill sets, and so we work with that communication. And I think kind of going back to like how that applies in the bigger picture is, like, fundamentally, when you're talking about neurologically diverse learners, we're talking about the primary strength from the get-go is the communication network. How the adults in the younger ages interface with one another and how we communicate information. Usually it's better if it happens before there's a problem. Like once there's a meltdown or once somebody is frustrated, at the point of frustration, then you have a whole lot of healing you have to do before you get back on track. And so if the communication's frequent, and we talked about conditions for success, and it's really the parent, the student, the support network being able to build a communication system that becomes a strength. And in many respects, I use the term executive function a lot, and maybe I shouldn't overuse it, but the ability to follow sequences and processes and to make a plan and execute that plan, or to do your work and then turn it in, right? These are really important pieces. Or to follow through on coaching that you've had for the script in your therapy sessions. All of those things, sometimes the outside community has to be the executive function for the individual and train them through that conversation until they can actually internalize that external dialogue.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I mean, executive functioning is a complex set of neurological processes. And even the best testing sometimes can't capture exactly where a person's specific strengths and challenges are. We can get in the right ballpark, but it's never perfect. And I think, to your point, kind of creating some of these systems and over time fine-tuning and refining them with the student, like getting the students' involvement in what worked. Because for some students, for example, creating a detailed schedule is great in theory, but they may have trouble with the way it's laid out, or the, having to check it so many times. And so a different sort of strategy might be needed. And that's something that you only really sort of understand after a little bit of trial and error, but it has to be the whole team sort of talking through that and conversing. One of the thoughts I had, Jay, when you were talking before, is you've designed a school that accommodates this, that doesn't even accommodate it, insists on this kind of open communication and collaboration. And I'm really appreciating that within some of our public schools, that simply does not exist. And that, at least on my end, has always been a place of important advocacy. Those systems have to be created in order for any of this to really take place. And I can't say that it's always been successful, but I can say I've had some families that have had luck in doing it through emails, and doing it through showing up at the end of the day and having a quick word with the teacher. It often involves just finding one or two people that are willing to kind of carry that communication system. But I also want to be fair and identify that I do realize that doesn't always happen. It's definitely a point of growth within a lot of our systems.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think all is not lost. In every school, there are people who care and are allies, and there are teachers who are, if they're not aware, they want to be. There's this sort of mystique in education, that special education is a series of magic buttons, or that there's these tricks that people who understand learning theory understand better than other people. And my experience is good teaching is good teaching. And good teaching begins with rapport and communication. And even when you have 45 kids in a classroom and not enough chairs for them all, which I have, I had 45 students in senior college prep English, and out of them, 15 were either second language learners or had some a 504 or an IEP. And it's harder to make the individual case, but I would have taken any advice or support I possibly could have gotten. I wanted everyone to succeed. And there are teachers out there who want everyone to succeed in every school, and they work hard. And finding that person, even if they're not your student's direct teacher, is one step closer, because they know all the other people who are like that, and they can become an avuncular kind of support network team member. The other thing I want to say is that administrators are critical. They set, like, being a principal of a school or a school leader is, in some ways, it's sort of technical, but it's dynamic, and you set the tone and you set the expectations for the school. And in that, there's a huge amount of play. If you're a principal that says, I'm committed to going to every IEP, or at least having my designee at every IEP because we care about all of our kids, then you set the tone for the whole campus, and people see how you act and they know what's expected. And so those people who may be on the fence move over on the side of allies. And I think anybody who spends a significant amount of time in the classroom realizes that everybody learns differently anyway. And you can kind of hit the middle, but you're always going to have outliers. And the idea isn't just to kind of get through the day, it's to engage these minds. And in order to do so, you have to spend as much time listening as talking. And I wanted to get back to something that you said, because I think that it's actually super helpful. You were talking about schedules and how schedules may need to be adapted. And so a lot of the very concrete tools are, you have schedules, you do previewing, you do lots of repetition, all of the standard stuff, you can look it up. But if the family isn't the type of family, like if you take your classic kind of I need a lot of structure in my life, kid, and you have a family that's pretty loosey-goosey, then a really critical part of managing that relationship is trying to find the middle ground that's comfortable, because if the parents aren't going to be able to provide the structure, then the structure has to be adapted to the lifestyle of the family. And so many times we've seen where, you know, all the right boxes are checked, and we have the perfect learning plan, and we slap it out there, and you know, everybody on the team agrees. It's textbook, and then the parents can't implement it for very practical reasons.
Yeah, it's
And
if the team has sort of missed the family culture, and that can be really vital to look at. I'm glad you pointed that out. Yeah.
And as they age, those relationships change a lot. So when you're in the kind of middle to later part of elementary school, a lot of neurodiverse students do homeschooling, and sometimes there's a lot of in-house support systems like ABA and that kind of thing. And as they grow up and they become more of a teenager, then the relationship with the parents shifts, and the appropriateness of mom being your teacher and also your mother, and being in the process of sort of defining yourself as a young adult, becomes another layer of challenge. And you know, you usually see this about 7th, 8th grade, where it really kind of hits it for a lot of families, and there's a lot of crisis. And knowing that there's sort of these developmental phases that are going to happen in terms of relationship, and at that point transferring responsibility to the plan that is co-created in harmony with the educational environment and a clear perception of sort of what its expectations are, and then also the therapeutic environment and the home life, and trying to bring those things into synchronicity makes a huge difference, especially like 5 through 7th grade, I think, is probably the critical one. And then when you get into 8th grade, people start moving into another phase where they're needing to be independent, and perhaps they're afraid that they can't be, and everybody's having trouble letting go.
Yeah, can we talk about that piece a little bit, because that actually comes up a lot in what I see in my work. The anxiety, that push and pull between providing enough scaffolding and support and sort of knowing when to pull back. And I know, at least from my training, I'm taught about different developmental phases. I think as a parent, though, we're often not given that information. And I think sometimes I see that anxiety grow when there are these developmental shifts that take place. What are your thoughts on that? I know you see that quite a bit with your students.
Well, in very simple terms, and you actually said it, I quote you all the time in the back of my mind. You have to, you can't do it for them. And I mean that in a lot of ways, but from an educational point of view, you're not teaching the student to write if you write it for them.
Mm-hmm.
You can teach them to organize their ideas, and you can scribe it for them. You can give them speech to text. You can use a variety of tools to get the words out. But at the end of the day, the lesson is for them. The student has to engage the lesson. And the same thing is true about like brushing your teeth or getting up in the morning or taking your meds or whatever those other pieces are. That I think what I see a lot of times is that, you know, if we kind of cut to the chase, there's a mystique, and I think a misunderstanding or a misperception that our kids are broken in some way, and they're not. They're different, and to adjust to the difference is an emotional piece. And so what do we do when we face challenges? Well, we go at it and we try different things, and we get support network and we bring it in. But at the end of it, a lot of what's motivating that is fear. And can we get past the fear to the place where the thing that is hard is expected and practiced in a supportive container that is going to keep you safe, but at the same time let you actually spread your wings. So, I mean, to me, this is, you can't do it for them. There's a point where incrementally, and it's different for each student and it's different at a different age group. But there are places where you should be autonomous as a human being, and that builds agency. And when you have autonomy and agency, then you know you can. And the way that we fight like lack of self-worth is by actually knowing we can, having efficacy. And we build efficacy by demanding it. So, I mean, those are my thoughts on it. And I think it's really, really hard because as a parent, I want to fix all the boo-boos and I want her never to be hurt. And, you know, I want her to be great at everything. And, you know, my daughter is beautiful and flawed, just like all of us. And she's got to learn to self-soothe and she's got to learn to like wake herself up in the morning and those, and she's the one who has to say, math is hard for me, so I'm going to work harder in math. There's a point where it's not helpful for me to do it for her anymore.
Right. Yeah, I sort of think of the formula of providing the appropriate scaffolding as best you can, and then every so often sort of pulling it down and seeing where the student is able to lean in a bit, and that there's going to be a lot of hiccups and a lot of repetition that needs to happen. And as a parent, that distress tolerance that has to be built through the years. But it's that constant dance, that back and forth. It is hard. It is hard.
And there is a lot of backwards movement. Like this is nothing goes in a straight line. And I think nature abhors a vacuum. Nature abhors a straight line even more. And so, you know, it's like you get it today and tomorrow you're back to tears. And you know, what I consider successful is when a student's forgotten how hard it was to do something. And they look back and they're like, oh, you know, like an example, you and I worked together with a student and this person had huge anxiety and just getting out of the car to go to school was hard. And when that student started with us, it was maybe go to class 15, 20 minutes and then go sit out in the antechamber, usually with me, but sometimes with other staff members, and get up the courage to go to the next class. And I remember the student's first speech. We did this college week thing and they study all this stuff and they kind of look at their future. And this is hugely anxiety producing. And one of the reasons we do it is because we have to create a container around that anxiety and say, you know what, actually you can fill out a job application. You can imagine what it's like to go to college and you can go be on a college campus and everything's gonna actually be okay, but you got to stretch it safely. And this person had a full-on thermonuclear meltdown on the first one. The second one was fine. And by the end, it seemed like it was second nature to get up and talk about the future.
Right, and I remember I think I know which family we're talking about, and we'll be very mindful of protecting confidentiality and privacy. In reality, we've shared several cases like this, I think, through the years. And one of the main themes that comes out in a moment like that is really around pacing and trusting that it's okay to go slow and to go at the student's pace, but holding that faith that they will get there. It's just a matter of kind of finding the right formula of what fits, and modeling patience, and modeling that self-advocacy language as well. This is hard today, but tomorrow it might be better. What might we do a little bit differently to make this feel better? All of those pieces, but not backing away from the challenge, I think is key. I think it's key.
Yeah, and not taking a bad day to mean everything.
Right.
It's not all over because you had a bad day, and a lot of times the bad days teach us how to have good days. Not in the right, like in the moment, it's bad. But after, when you can get back and you can sort of process and go through the social thinking process of, what happened and how did you see it and how did other people see it? And when you're in that sort of sober-minded debrief time, there's a lot of gems that come out. And, numerous students that I've worked with have school anxiety. And a lot of it is learning to become comfortable with yourself in that environment. And that's also kind of how we respond as a team. So if a student comes home and has had a really hard day at school, isn't necessarily a bad thing. There's a certain cognitive dissonance that's necessary, but if it's every day or if it's totally intolerable, that's a completely different thing. But a couple like really getting stressed out is actually a healthy part of the learning process.
Right. It can be that brink of growth. Can we pivot for just a second, Jay? Because I'm just thinking about, an overall successful academic course really involves the social piece. And I think we've even gotten we've received a question here asking, how are social skills taught, incorporated at Jay's school? And I think that would be a really helpful area for us to talk about, not only within your school, but also in other school settings, how we work with that piece.
Again, so our design is to try to make things as normal feeling as possible. This is just how things happen. This is what we do. It's really changed a lot since we've been on distance learning. And so COVID has, like, pretty much you take the complete design model, throw it out the window, and then try to recreate it in a virtual world. So I actually think one of the most important pieces is actually having the consistency of being there every day and being together as a community and stressing that and having community events where we celebrate things and that we have something to look forward to. And so at RLA last year before COVID, we had certain routines. So at the beginning of the school day, we go for a walk, and we're near San Jose City College. So we would go walk around the block, and that little informal time is perfect because I'm not the head of school, blah, blah, blah. I'm Jay, and we're walking. And you came out of your parents' car or you got off the school bus and you have whatever baggage and morning stuff you have, whatever's going on in your mind, and you're just you, and we all get to talk and walk and check in with each other. And taking the pulse is the best thing you can do, because if somebody comes in with a charge on, they're going to bring it in the classroom. If there's stuff that needs to be managed, we can manage it together in a sort of progressive way. And then after the walk, we come in and we set the schedule up, and we sort of have a check-in, more of a formal check-in. So we transition from independent beings moving in space to people in a room with a schedule and a plan and some goals for the day. And then we go about half the day, and then we stop for lunch, and we actually eat together and play games. And again, that informal time is really important because that's when we learn context, right? Everything's learned from multiple repetitions in different contexts. And so at the end of the day, we have another sort of social time where we kind of plan for tomorrow, predict what's going to happen. We check out. I have a little routine. I've got this thing that's called the dinger, and I ding the dinger. And when I ding the dinger, it's done, and what has been done cannot be undone. And so there's a sort of like closure, which is auditory, and that is kind of the architecture. And we do all of those routines with distance learning right now, but we don't have as much power from the proprioceptive element where I just see somebody's not feeling well, and then we have a conversation. It's like, oh, you didn't eat breakfast. Well, here, have some watermelon. Like that, you know, that's the piece of being in community together is also about being physically present together. And
I was just
so,
thinking, in the truest sense, Jay, what I think you're talking about is building community, finding your people, building community through rituals, routines, setting those social expectations. You know, everyone's going to join in, and yeah, and how much that's shifted in the last several months, and
yeah,
hopefully we'll get back
we
to.
took a deep stab at it, and I wonder, you know, I would say that we're coming back 70% in the positive in terms of our attempts at community building. It's not the same because, you know, when people, like, for example, we might take the kids to, like we took them to Savers to buy coffee mugs. And we wanted them, you know, we gave them some money and we said, go find a coffee mug so that you have a mug for warm tea when it got cold. That kind of challenge is perfect for a lot of kids, and it's not a school thing. And so how do you recreate those types of things? Or I don't want to go on a walk, my feet hurt, I don't like my shoes. How do we deal with that? And how do we deal with it in a way that other people see, and you have peers, and then there's that dynamic of like, where do I fit in the pack, and how do I become a member and invest myself in the success of others, which is kind of the goal of community, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I know Marcy and Yael are gonna offer us some questions.
Thank you, guys. This is amazing. I wish all schools were run like this, and with this kind of partnership. I had a question because I really loved what you said about flow and finding the thing that makes you lose time. And I'm wondering how you incorporate that into the day-to-day school activities. We hear from a lot of teachers that they feel hemmed in by sort of standardized testing. And if I can't let them write a comic book instead of an essay, because then what will they do next year? And I'm just curious how you address that.
So go ahead, Louise.
I'll just say, when kiddos are younger, what I notice we end up doing is building in sort of like these reward systems, right, for the thing that they really love to do. And I think we weave it in a very structured and sort of formal way to manage behaviors. But the more I've been doing this work, there's a time and a place for it. But I think Jay will probably talk to this a bit. It's finding what the student is really good at and what they love to do, and how you build some curriculum around that in a meaningful way and expand those skills and interests in a more meaningful way. Go ahead, Jay. I know you can
Totally right on. I think, you know, if I could give advice to people in a more traditional setting too, the truth is that there is a huge amount of pressure to meet the curriculum and hit the scope and sequence, and there's a lot riding on it, and testing is sort of less important now than it was, say, 5 or 6 years ago, but it's still high pressure. And schools, the new California dashboard is very rigorous, and so I think if you think from a multisensory perspective, every student's going to be good at something with one of their senses. And I know this seems silly, but there are people who are really good kinesthetically, and there are people who are really good oral, like they hear something and they can like almost have oral photographic memory. People who are very astute visually. And if you can construct assignments that have elements of the different senses as part of them, then you can do fair service to Caesar and meet the standards and teach them the rigorous skill that they must learn, especially in high school. It's very challenging to hit everything. But you can also keep them engaged, and at least some part of that assignment is a win. So I'll give you a good example. So classic California standards for English language arts is to give a speech. So there's lots of ways to teach people how to give a speech, but in my opinion, the best way is to actually watch a lot of speeches and to look at speeches and study how people who gave great speeches spoke. And in that, you have art and you have history and you have even mathematics and you have all kinds of scaffolding tools that you can use. Like you can take Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech and you can dissect it into images. You can create visual representations of it. And then when you come back, you can translate those visual, like say it's a photo montage from a PowerPoint or something like that. You could translate that back into a structured essay. So it doesn't have to be either or. There's actually a lot of ways that people can demonstrate what they know. And there's, 8 or 9 different learning styles. My belief, and I hear a lot of times, like this is one of my pet peeves, is that people are like, well, I'm a visual learner and that means I don't have to listen, or that I'm not very good at interpersonal, so, I'm not going to bother. But in my mind, you should lead with your strengths, the things that are easy for you. Where is learning easy for me? Where do I lose time with my learning? And then you should also be constantly aware of like the areas that are your blind spots or the harder bits. And so you can construct assignments that are very standard, that engage all of the senses. And then everybody gets some piece that they win. And if you grade it holistically, then they maybe didn't write perfect grammatical statements, but they did represent the meaning or the theme. And oftentimes our non-neurotypical learners are the ones who have the light bulb moment and have the amazing insight or see this aesthetic value of something that is completely dismissed in your standard curriculum and never validated. So I guess that would be what I would add is you can do that without a specialized learning environment.
Thank you. Marcy, did you have a question? That was, I will definitely give that advice to some of my kids' teachers. Go ahead, Marcy.
Question is, how do you guys handle situations where the goals of the parent, the student, the teacher, the psychologist, the different team members are not all aligned? Whether it's the future goals, whether it's the, the path that they're on, and how do you work together and incorporate the family and the student to kind of help get on the same page? Because I think that's a problem that is not uncommon.
Not uncommon at all.
Yep.
Not uncommon. How do we do it, Jay? I'm trying to think about how I do that in my work. And I think at least in the therapy room, it comes down to having a richer discussion of what individuals are wanting, what they're seeking, what their expectations are, and then using the fine art of compromising a lot of the time and really seeing how you can all come together and agree on a midpoint, and really just using more flexible thinking, and that there's multiple ways to the same endpoint. It's such an abstract, lame answer. I'm sorry. I wish I could be more concrete, but it does come up.
It's intuitive. I mean, that's the thing, is that so much of this is artistic, and it's about your interpersonal dynamics with people, and can you get them to be clear about their boundaries and expectations, and then build agreement.
Yeah, it's often not about like someone's right or wrong. It's often working through what are the concerns, what are the worries, what are the fears, what are the feelings that go along with the expectation that you have, and just teasing those apart so that a bigger perspective, a more appreciated perspective can happen. Does
Yeah.
that, do you feel like that answers it, Marcy? Do you want to give me something concrete?
I think it's the dialogue that takes place to understand if a parent is saying, you know, we must go to college, or you must go to the army, or that, you know, whatever, it doesn't matter what it is, but they have their opinion and it could be the best choice, but the student, if their opinion, maybe the school is saying, no, 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 I see the student is so great with their hands, like, and there's these different polls. And you know, giving space to all of those viewpoints, I think is important, but then, you know, and having people kind of move towards the center as the student ages. So I think it's a process, but it's a tricky one. And that's why I think, you know, the work that you guys have done and the communication that you have will, you know, can identify these issues and bring the family in and have, you know, some discussions, because I think those kinds of challenges really impact the student the most, right? Like they're the ones who are gonna not be at their best because of that conflict around them. So your dialogue is so helpful.
Yeah, and I think if anyone becomes too dogmatic in the course of this, that's a sure way to get someone to shut down and avoid and not do it. So you really do need to find a way to work with the student and honor what it is they're saying. Oftentimes it's pays to listen.
And it's also cyclical, because you guys were talking earlier about self-advocacy, but if the student hasn't practiced the self-advocacy, it's hard for them to stand up for themselves and say, hey, no, but I really like this. And so you can really see how the education and focusing on all of these points all along is so important.
Well, I think that's where we stand kind of, so I think recognizing the scope of your relationship and what you offer, you know, if you think about the wheel of this person's life, and so their educational spoke has a certain scope to it and it has a shape, and if you try to bend it too much, then the wheel goes flat. And so like, first of all, you have to trust the people on the team. So, you know, if I have a fundamental difference with, say, you know, a recommendation that Louise makes, then I need to step back and think, okay, what is this? Why am I having that reaction? And then, like, what is my role here? And it's just like the parents getting split. You know, go ask your mom, go ask your dad. If we don't hold the line of communication, say this is our agreement, we stick to our agreements, and we're not afraid to have the hard conversations, but not necessarily in front of everybody. That's, I think, the key, because, you know, all this seems to come down to me about perception. And if you perceive that there's a lack or something, then you may have a fear, or you may have an unfulfilled need, and you may not know how to articulate it. And we're all working together and we all have desires. Like, I want the kids to be successful. And if we start with that, then you got to have the courage to have the hard conversation. And I think that's the other piece too, is that we all kind of hide a little bit from what we think to be the truth, but we don't test it. And oftentimes when you have the hard conversation, you find that actually the other person thought something completely different than what you assumed. And all of your actions are sort of dancing around an issue that maybe isn't even a conflict.
Thank you. So speaking of different needs and understanding what students really need and peering behind what's obvious. How do you persuade a school to give learning accommodations to a 2E student who's getting A's in many areas but needs help when the school feels that since the student is already getting A's in some areas, it's not okay to give support in a subject where the student is failing? How do you recognize that a 2E student may need support?
Yeah, I can speak about that from like a testing point of view. So oftentimes schools want data. They want to see that there's a learning discrepancy. And then they're more apt to push in supports or make accommodations. I'm also reading through the comments and seeing some comments about systemic changes in school and how do we advocate for that. And I don't have a good answer for that at this point. I think though, in my work with individual families, some of the best work that I think that we've done together is taking a giant step back and really assessing where you want to put your energy. Does it make sense to hone in on this one area of difficulty and go to bat with the school professionals and really insist that that change happen? And sometimes it does. Oftentimes it doesn't. And so pulling back and taking a bigger perspective of the student's overall learning profile and how they're doing holistically is sometimes a better approach.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this is where those psychoeducational tests and the data can be really powerful, especially if you're in a adversarial relationship. There is something in the design of our system, and I wouldn't presume to be able to like wave my magic wand and figure out what's wrong and what's right and what to fix, but getting an accommodation is a legal process by which you prove that the student needs it and the school signs off that they will provide it under penalty of law. I mean, I realize that that seems really extreme, but a lot of times that's what it comes down to. And when people can't get their needs met, it often in public schools, like the next step is to go to the ID Act. And I think that the key is actually about relationships and rapport. When you sit in an IEP team meeting, if you take the adversarial stance, then you close the door to flexibility. So, sitting on that side of the desk and say, okay, this person needs X, Y, and Z. Do I have the resources? How much is it going to cost? How will that work? I know this is not very friendly, but these are the considerations that the team has to take into account. And ultimately, whatever services are provided are then bound by that fate. So a lot of creativity comes out when there are good relationships. You say, wow, this is really working. What would it take for you to do X, Y, and Z? And I think kind of going below the system and starting at the human level makes a huge difference. And the other thing is, if a student isn't doing well in a particular class, I would go right to the teacher. Not in a aggressive way, but I would say, hey, this really isn't working. It's not working for any of us. What would it take for you to do this? Is it realistic? And how badly can you help my child succeed? And especially in high school, the student coming to the teacher and advocating for themselves is the most powerful thing, because I want students to come to me and want to learn from me and want to be in relationship with me. And so I'm going to say yes. And I could say yes to things that the administration can't necessarily say yes to, or the IEP team can't say yes to because they don't have the data.
That makes a lot of sense. Definitely building the relationship with the teacher has helped me for my own kids. We have a question of somebody saying, as a person in recovery, looking back, I personally turned to substance abuse in the absence of being medicated and not being able to handle the stressors of social situations and expectations of me. What can we do to help parents, teachers, and students who are or may not be diagnosed with spectrum conditions first turn for help instead of toward a path of self-destruction?
What a great question. So I personally look at substance use as a form of coping, and then it often creates, you know, this unfortunate other set of issues. And I think if you're able to find a safe person, talk to that safe person. Sometimes that's a parent, sometimes that's a friend, sometimes that's an educator. But I think for the systems to also have resources and be doing that sort of outreach and psychoeducation is really important. You know, assessing for that, but not just assessing directly with students, you know, assessing, are we creating the kind of culture that is supportive of people in a whole way? And I mean, clearly, I think oftentimes we totally miss that mark in society. And so that's something I think for the systems to really reevaluate and really think about. As a parent, you know, thinking about what school culture you're sending your child into. Is it a healthy one? And if it's not a healthy one, what's to be done about that? Where can you contribute differently? How can you sort of inoculate your child if they do need to go to that kind of environment? Those are all the thoughts that swirl around in my mind.
Yeah, I agree. I would add that when someone's self-medicating, that opening clear and honest communication is kind of the most important thing, right? If I have students that are experimenting with drugs, then I want to know. And so often people who are in the drug culture are more inviting and welcoming and tolerant of people who feel different. And so there's a certain, you know, perfect storm, so to speak. And, you know, being realistic about people have a variety of coping mechanisms. And so what are you doing? Like, what are you doing and why? And building some self-awareness around that, and then getting kind of the team on board with working on that, I think is really important, because so much shame associated with people taking care of themselves the best way they can. And I'm not advocating for that, but you know, teenagers want to feel loved and cared about and accepted. And when people say, hey, you're the life of the party, you're accepted, you're loved, and you're cared about, it's hugely persuasive. And we can't forget that we're motivated social beings, whether we are, you know, neurotypically social or not. We want to have friends, and we want to date people, and we want to do all the stuff that everybody else wants to do. And those urges are powerful. And the only way that you can really help somebody is to know, to open the dialogue and to really hear them, and then take the steps necessary for that need to be fulfilled. At a school level, I think that there's a blind acceptance sometimes that like kids are just going to do things. And so it's about getting caught or not getting caught. And the conversation is completely avoided. And actually the conversation needs to be had, and it should happen at home first. But if it doesn't happen at home, I think it needs to happen at school. And that's another piece that I would add to what Louise shared.
That's all really that communication piece and coping strategies, and there are so many important elements to that. It's a tricky one to navigate through with teenagers. And we have another question. How is the work you do together and with your students and clients preparing them for the 21st century workforce?
You want to go for that?
It's a big question. I don't frame, when I see a student, when I see a family, I'm not preparing them for the 21st century workforce. I'm really focused on their overall health and wellness, and building up their skill sets and making sure that they have hobbies and social outlets, that their mental health is taken care of. Yeah, I'm not so focused on the workforce. I feel like if you have a solid foundation in those areas and you give the message that really taking care of yourself holistically is what's important, that those other things sort of will fall in line. Now, having said that, you know, I definitely think that within our communities and our businesses, we need to make space for people who think differently, learn differently. And that's the advocacy piece that I'm interested and involved in. But I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, so when you write a charter, you have to answer this question: what is an educated person in the 21st century? It's built into the California Education Code. And so there's a lot of ways to answer that question. You know, the truth is, when I enroll a student, I'm looking at what can we do to increase your capacity for a rich and fulfilling life. And underneath that, it's sort of like preparing you for the 21st century, or preparing you for college, or preparing you for the next class in high school is almost irrelevant. To, you know, who are you going to be as an adult, and like, how are you going to make the most like passionate use of your life? And along with that, these other things come, and the answer is going to be different for every human being. And of course, there are things that we do, like we're having students use audio recording and video, and doing video productions along with sort of the traditional reading, writing, and arithmetic, because we live in a tech world. So they need to be comfortable having a conference like this, and they need to be able to use the technologies that are available to them. And they probably will need to have a website and a portfolio and all of these other pieces. And so there's very technical things that prepare you for the future of communication. The medium changes, so now you have to teach a new medium. It's part of education. But the more important thing is, how do we help you define success? And then how do we give you the tools so that you can meet that definition on your own terms? And I like to think that we're helping people become masters of their own destiny. I don't know that any of us are, but you know, that's the goal, right?
Thank you. Okay, so another, shifting gears a little bit, how do you deliberately integrate culture, race, ethnicity, and gender into your work with youth and families?
So for me, in my work, you know, part of, I think, being a good therapist is listening to the families, to the students' story and their experience in the world, and being informed on how they're experiencing the world, and what their family ethos are, their family cultural components, what's important to them individually, and then taking an incisive look at the systems that they're involved in, and what that really means for that particular student, how inclusive those systems are, how fair those systems are, and being able to work with whomever I'm working with to better understand that. So it's so dependent on the particular family or student that I'm working with. If my experience as a white woman in the world is too divergent from a patient that I'm working with or a student that I'm working with, I personally think it's my responsibility, my ethical responsibility, to find a better fit. And so I actively do that when needed as well.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it. I mean, any meaningful conversation about, well, around diversity starts with identity, and like where knowing your own place. Like, we have our individual identity, how we make up our concept of self, and then we have like how others view us. So there's many layers, and you can think of it like a target, so you start with like, who do I think I am, and then who do others think I am, and then like, how do I interface with everybody else's bullseyes. And so knowing kind of when people look at you, what are the judgments that they're making, or assumptions about your life. I think that's a key piece. And then not being afraid to kind of put them out there so that other people feel empowered to say that too. And I think a lot of times we talk about gender and gender dysphoria, and we talk about ethnic and cultural differences because we have such huge fissures in our nation. But also we have people, as say like dyslexics, aren't a group or a tribe per se, but there is like an assumption by class, and so there's an identity as somebody who's identified or identify themselves as a particular type of learner. And so there's these other dimensions of identity that I think are important to tease out and try to explore. From a curricular perspective, in the immigration from the European nations from the 1490s forward, there's been a very direct attempt to erase the stories that people tell, from the burning of books in Mexico, the codexes, and to actually like literally killing the people that could read the quipus in the Andes. And so one of the ways that we can address the sort of jagged edge of our sort of cultural identity as American people is to tell the stories that aren't told, and to tell the stories that are silenced. And that includes our own stories, but also sometimes we have to speak for others, aware of our own privilege and position to be able to do so. But like in our history class, we're teaching US history this year, but we studied all of the Americas from Greenland to the tip of Tierra del Fuego. And we're starting with the stories of the people, the indigenous people. And I think it's essential for us to have American history reflect the stories of Americans. And I think it's the same thing that we had kind of in our key points about who, how you tell your story about who you are determines how you succeed, and the story of your success. And it's how, like, the stories you tell about yourself. Are you autistic? Is that your story? Or is your story that you're really into trains? Like, or is your story something completely different from that? And what is the story you tell, and how do you tell your story with agency and confidence?
Yeah, it's an important point. Another question is, teachers are asked to do so much today. Almost every new idea, initiative, or approach says we need more teacher professional development. What can we do to help move teachers along in supporting neurodivergent students in inclusive classrooms without asking them to do, without asking for them to do the impossible?
It assumes, the question sort of assumes that it's impossible. I'll just speak from the teacher perspective. Most professional development for teachers is useless and temporary or fleeting. And I don't mean to criticize anyone out there who's made their career around that, including myself. But what changes is deep changes in your practice, and deep changes in your practice don't come from an initiative that your district buys and then implements. It comes from stopping and listening and saying, hey, you know, when as an example, when I got my first computer lab as a teacher way back in 1998, I stopped teaching writing for a whole year because I was teaching how to troubleshoot computers. Actually my entire curriculum changed because I had to figure out how to teach people how to use a computer to write. And I completely had no time to teach writing. And after I learned how to do that, then I could do both again. But I think the same thing goes with how do you make your classrooms more inclusive for neurodivergent people? Well, you start by looking at your practice and you say, where am I missing it, or what is not working? And then you go after it. And then all the resources are there. It's lots of people, but if you go looking for it, you're going to want it and you're going to implement it. But if you have to go to a meeting and you got paid to go and sit there and eat pizza while somebody talks at you, you may or may not actually have it stick. And finally, the role of the administration is super key. If you're going to invest in professional development, you got to follow up. You've got to continue to support people. It's not enough just to give it to them and say, here, now you're experts, go do it. You actually have to build a structure and long term. And that goes to like directing your school culture in a thoughtful way.
I'll just add, I mean, I think setting the tone that these interventions, these learnings, it doesn't necessarily have to be an uphill battle, that a lot of what's available is actually really creative and interesting and works for many types of learners and many types of students. But I very largely agree with what you said, Jay.
I agree. We often talk about how the changes we're asking you to make for different minds are going to help all students. Mm-hmm. So probably one last question. I would love to hear some sort of concrete changes, like real stories from somebody of change that you guys have been able to make by working. So Louise working with a classroom, working with a teacher, or Jay, when students come to you from other schools and they've been sort of, you know, they feel beaten down. What are some changes you guys have been able to affect that have, you know, that we could maybe learn from for our own students?
Well, I just want to start out by saying one of the gifts of the pandemic has been that it's sped us up in some ways, but it's also slowed us down in others. And it's been very, very cool. It's been very heartening. I've had multiple families in the last couple of months reach out that maybe I haven't worked with for 5, 10 years, kind of come full circle and say, hey, just wanted to drop this off. My kiddo's doing X, Y, and Z. And I've, in most cases, been able to talk with the families directly and sort of do a retrospective and ask, what's worked? Like, what's actually gotten you to the place that you're in? And there's a couple threads that are pretty common. One is persistence. and not losing heart even when it gets really challenging. One is finding your people, finding those people who are going to listen to you and work with you. Another is definitely trying to effect changes within the system, but not getting bogged down in it, kind of pushing forward anyway in the way that's right for you and your family and your child. Being really judicious where you put your energy. I've often worked with families who sort of get overloaded with the challenges in the system, and we see depression and anxiety, and that is not helpful to get too bogged down. Like definitely some advocacy because things need to shift, but also kind of staying true to what does your child need in this moment and how might you best get that. So I want to start by answering the question by just saying that I don't think there's one or two cool things that I've been able to do. I really attribute families' perseverance and also the children's perseverance as well. Just not giving up, finding what they're good at, holding true to that, and listening to the advice of the ones that they trust around them. Jay, why don't you jump in and I'll think more and add.
I think you're right. I mean, so there's a recipe that we look for, and it's not that complicated as far as school success goes. The parents in the school need to be on the same page, and they need to trust each other. And so, like, things get tough. These kids are hard to teach, and it doesn't go easy every day. It goes, and a lot of times at the beginning, it goes harder. And then in your senior year, everything is always hard. Like, regardless, like, senior year is always kind of a mess. The consent of the student to learn and to have the people in their community be part of their life. I know it seems like a strange thing, but if you go to school every day and you know that the people around you actually care about you and will want to see you be successful. It doesn't mean that you don't have squabbles and like teenagers can be catty and whatnot, but that at the end of the day, they're part of a community that wants to see them succeed, and that they're learning from people that they like, and they feel supported, and the parents in the school are on the same page. It's pretty much not, there's very few can'ts in that. It's just a how long and what is it going to take. And so I think that's the critical piece. The families that stand behind when it gets hard and circle up with the school, when the school sees the struggle and they circle up with the families, that's where we've seen success over and over and over again. And whenever there's been like, one that got away, it's been that there was an unwillingness to go all the way together. And so, I mean, I have many, like all of my students, even some who didn't graduate from my schools, that I feel very proud of what they've accomplished. And, but the recipe is persistence and finding your tribe, just as Louise says, I think. And then it's easy to work together because we know we can lock arms when things get tough.
Mm-hmm. Sort of that wrapping and support. I've also noticed through the years, making sure that your student has a positive outlet, going back full circle to what you were saying in the beginning, Jay, where a student can really build their sense of self and their confidence. That's hugely important. And oftentimes that doesn't happen in the school setting. It happens outside of school, extracurriculars or a particular hobby. maybe not something formalized through sports or music, but, and I just like to add attending to not only the student's mental health, but the family's mental health, because this can be a rougher journey, and making sure that all members of the family who are affected are getting the necessary supports. Sometimes I make the greatest impact in a family when I work with the mom or I work with the dad. In some situations, it's been working with the sibling and just really paying attention to the whole family unit and the balance and harmony within the family. Yeah.
Thank you guys. That was really great. And I really like this ending that you guys, that this last question brought out of really connecting things. I feel like a lot of the points that you raised throughout were brought together with that, and the persistence and, you know, the taking care of oneself and working together, the teamwork and communication. It's also important in this process of educating our kids. I know Dr. Fung wanted to say some closing words. I don't know if there he is.
Just want to thank Jay and Louise for sharing your insights. It's a really important topic for our children that are going through a lot of different things, and it's good to hear your perspectives. And I'd like to thank Marcy and Yael for moderating this session. So we are ending our third day of the conference. Tomorrow in the morning at 8:30, we're going to resume. So thank you again. And for those that want to access our videos, the YouTube videos will be accessible in our Summit website. Thanks again, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Right.
You bye.